Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be doing a full playthrough of Tides of Madness. This is a two-player only hand drafting style game that is set in the Lovecraftian Cthulhu universe. As you are playing this game, you're going to be slowly going mad while you are also trying to make certain conditional things work in the tableau of cards that you are drafting to get the most victory points. This madness that you're getting, it could get you points, but it could also lose you the game if you take too much and just flat out go insane. I'll explain the game while we're playing it, so let's jump in. The entire game of Tides of Madness is comprised of this deck of 18 cards and a big pile of Madness tokens. In order to set up the game, we're simply going to deal out 5 cards to each of the 2 players. We'll be playing from the perspective of the left-hand player, and our opponent will be over here on the right. These cards don't make it into our first hand, but we're going to be seeing every single card as we go through the game. At this point, each player is going to grab their hand and they are going to simultaneously select one card from their hand. We're going to put it face down on the table until both people have picked, and then we will reveal that card. Once we have done that, we're going to actually pass the 4 remaining cards to our opponent and then get the 4 remaining from them and then choose one from those 4. So all those things considered, let's take a look at the cards themselves and figure out which one of these 5 cards we want to start with. So let's look at the anatomy of a card. To start, we have the name down at the bottom. This is the Lovecraftian Cthulhu mythos, so I'm probably going to butcher all of the crazy names they have, like the Panoptic manuscripts. We see in the top left corner, this is a manuscript suit. There are 5 different suits in the game, and there are 3 cards in each of the suits, which leaves 3 cards left over which don't actually have a suit, and I'll explain those as we get there. This card also has these tentacles on the side of the card. In fact, a couple of them do in our hand. And what this means is once we actually finish this round, play 5 cards, and score the 5 cards we have, we're going to take 1 madness for each card that has these tentacles. And in general, madness can be bad. If you ever end a round with 9 or more madness, you immediately lose the game. But if you have acquired the most madness within a given round, you have the option to generate 4 victory points or discard a madness. So madness is not always a bad thing. It's definitely an interesting resource. So lastly, and somewhat more importantly, we have the text in the top right of every single one of these cards, which is a scoring condition. We see this one says, for the majority of the outer gods, gain 7 victory points. Now, this would be the number of these outer god symbols in all the cards in our area once we'd played them down. This card itself does not actually have that icon on it, so I don't know if it's actually that interesting. In fact, when we look at our whole hand, none of these are outer gods cards, so we're probably not very interested in playing this for our first card because there just might not be that many in this first given hand. The second card is the Necronomicon. It's also a manuscript, it also induces madness, and we see that for each madness, you gain a victory point. So this is actually one other way that you can get good things out of going mad while you're playing the game. Now we have Innsmouth. This is a location suit. It says for each suit you don't have, gain 3 points. And again, there are 5 suits in the game, but you're probably going to be showing at least 2 or 3 of them in general once you have all these cards played out in front of you. So you're probably hoping to get 3 to 6 points in general with this card, but we'll see how it plays out. I think at the moment it's not the most interesting one we have available to us. Now we have Shub Niggurath. This one is one of the 3 suitless cards that are in the game, and we see at the top it says you double the victory points of your previously played card, which could be really powerful, except if you play it as your first card, there's no card to double, so it's actually a completely useless card for us to play, so we don't even need to think about it. And lastly, we have the Deep Ones. This is one of the races in the game, and it is madness inducing, and we see up here it says, for each set of a Great Old One and a manuscript, gain 6 victory points. So this is interesting because we have 2 manuscripts in our hand, so we have a very good possibility of getting the manuscripts we need, but we don't know if there are any old ones out there. We don't have any Great Old Ones in our hand, and we just don't know if our opponent has any. They may or may not, or they might all be stuck in that deck over to the side. I think for the moment, the bang for our buck, I think we'll actually go with this one. It's very likely that there is a Great Old One in our opponent's hand, but of course, we're going to play this face down to the table. And once our opponent has also picked, we will simultaneously reveal both of them. We see they have played Yog Sothoth. This is an outer god. It's going to give them a madness token, so we're kind of tied for trying to have the most at this point. And it says, for the majority of locations, gain 7 points. And that's actually a bit of a bummer because we're now going to be transferring these hands over, and we know that one of the cards in this hand is a location-based card, so they may or may not take it. We'll see. It's time once again for us to pick a card, and the first thing we check is to see if there are any Great Old Ones in here, and we are lucky there is here. So I think pretty much guaranteed we're going to be playing this card so that we can make this set because we know that our opponent has 2 manuscript cards in their hand. But let's look at all the other cards we have in our hand. This is Azathoth. It is an outer god, and it says for each Great Old One, you get 3 points. This is pretty good if you already have Great Old Ones or you think you might pick them up from your opponent, but we know we're not getting any from their hands, so this card is not going to be great for us. Here is the Dreamlands. It's one of the 3 suitless cards, and in fact, it says this card has a wild suit. So it does actually have a suit, but it's just of your choosing, and that is such a strong ability, especially when you consider all the majorities, that down the bottom it says, additionally, take 1 madness from your opponent, which could be seen as a good thing or a bad thing. And it's important to note that this is going to happen after we gain our madness for all of our tentacles on the cards, but it's going to happen also after we decide who took the most madness within a given turn. So this won't cause a swing for that 4 points there. So yeah, the next card is Rylith. It is a location. It makes madness, and it says for the majority in the Elder Gods, gain 7 points. So there's lots of things that relate to the Elder Gods, but there aren't that many Elder Gods. So let's take a look at the great old one. Sorry, not Elder God. This great old one right here is Hastur, and it gets even better for us. It says for each manuscript, gain 3 points. And we know we're going to get a manuscript so that we can make this set. And that means that manuscript's going to be worth 3 more points. This is pretty much a no-brainer. We are going to pick this card here. It looks like our opponent wants this card right here from their hand. So we reveal both of them, and we see we're not very surprised. Our opponent picked Innsmouth. This is the one that has that location. They're looking to have the majority in locations to try and grab 7 points, and they are also now going to get 3 points for every suit they don't have. Currently, they have 2 suits in their hand, so this is a maximum of 9 points, but we'll see if they're able to avoid getting any other suits. At this point, we are now going to transfer our hands back over to each other, and let's see what our opponent gave us. Well, I guess we actually knew already. This one that doubles the point value of the last card we played is not actually very strong, and we just know we absolutely have got to pick up one of these manuscripts. I guess actually now that I say that, that's not true. If we did this one, we'd give both of these to our opponent. They'd pick one and give us the other, so we would still make that set. This one right here would double the score, double this card right here, which would get us essentially 3 more points for the specific manuscript card. I think that is an interesting play, but not necessarily the best one. Let's look at these 2 cards. I think it's probably better for us to pick between the 2 and grab the one that makes the most sense for us. We see they both cause madness, so there's no real difference between them there. And then when we look at the top, we see this one says for the majority in the Outer Gods, gain 7 points, and this one says for each madness, gain 1 point. Now, we know that we're going to have at least 2 madness because we already played one and both of these have madness on them. So this Necronomicon is pretty much a guaranteed 2 points. But this other one, for the majority in the Outer Gods, we can see that our opponent has already played 1 Outer God card. So if we give this to them, they're somewhat likely to play it to try and work towards that advantage, especially considering they're trying to stick within a certain set of suits. I guess that would be a manuscript, but they'd be more likely to try and make that happen, especially if they happen to play that card that is the wild suit. They don't decide what suit that is until we actually score, and that would be a really nice swing for them. So I think we should probably hedge our bets and play this card to deny our opponent from having that opportunity. So we'll put it over here. Once our opponent has picked as well, we're going to reveal both of the cards, and we are not too surprised to see that they did indeed go with Rylith. It is a location. It plays into them trying to have the most in that one specific one, and it also is going to give them 7 points if they had the most Great Old Ones, which we currently have. They essentially counterdrafted against us just like we did against them, and at this point we are now going to transfer the cards back over, and since there are only 2 cards left at this point, we're essentially choosing 1 card for ourselves and 1 card for our opponent to play on the final round of this one specific turn. Our 2 options available to us are the Dreamlands and Azathoth right here. Now, the Dreamlands is going to give us a suit of our choosing and would have us grab a madness from our opponent and put it over into our area. Now, that happens after we decide all the majorities and stuff, and looking out, we're both right now making 2 madness, but neither of these actually make madness, so that's not actually something we really need to think of on this turn. When we look to our other option, Azathoth here is it's an Outer God, and we do have this card down here, which would get us 7 points if we have the majority in the Outer Gods. Now, we don't actually have any yet, so if we played this down, we'd be tied with our opponent for 1, and we'd be giving our opponent this card, which could turn into any specific suit of their choosing. So it's a bit of an interesting decision between the 2. Neither of them seem particularly strong, but I think all things considered, let's go ahead and take this one for the wild suit. We might be taking a bunch of badness, and that might start restricting our options on the following turns, but we'll see how this pans out. So this is going to be gifted over to our opponent. Our opponent decided on this card, and they're going to give this one over to us. So let's go ahead and reveal these 2, and we are really happy to see they picked the Necronomicon, because that means we're going to steal one of their points, their madness points away from them. So that worked out pretty well in our favor. And finally, we can reveal these two down here. So at this point, we have now finished playing all 5 of the cards, and we are now going to each take madness equal to the number of these tentacles out on our areas. So our opponent is going to get 3 madness, and we'll get 2. Since our opponent generated more madness on that last turn, they have the option of making 4 points or discarding one of these madness. They figure it's early enough in the game and they know we're going to steal one of their madness away from them. They are just going to make the 4 victory points. And we have this nice little scoring pad which shows us the 3 overall turns to the game. So where it's us versus them, they are going to take 4 points for the majority on the madness. And now we are going to write down the amount of points we got for all of the scoring cards. We'll start scoring with us, but before that even happens, we need to grab the madness over from our opponent for this Dreamlands, and we need to decide what suit this is going to be. I think that it is going to end up being a manuscripts for us. That's going to get us the most points. We do have this card over here that would give us 7 points if we had a majority in the Outer Gods, but our opponent has 2 of them in their area. We have none currently, so having 1 here isn't going to do much for us. And of course, we need to put this Shub Nugaruth over here. It kind of overlaps on the last card you play, so you know what gets doubled. And our opponent played this really well. When you play this on top of another card that doesn't score you points, well, you're doubling 0. So unfortunately, this card is going to get us 0 points. So we can now look to the scoring, and we see over here that the Deep Ones is going to get us 6 points for every set of Great Old Ones and manuscripts. Well, we have 2 manuscripts and only 1 Great Old One, so that's going to get us 6 points. Next up, this Hastur is going to give us 3 points per manuscript. That's why we made this one a manuscript, so that's going to get us 6 points total there. And then, as I mentioned before, we do not have a majority in the Outer Gods, so that is 0 points for that card. Both of these don't actually generate points, so that means we ended the first round with 12 victory points. And now for our opponents, they have Innsmouth, which is going to get them 3 points for every suit they don't have currently face up in their area, which is 2 out of the 5 suits. So they are going to get 6 points for that. And now Yog-Sothoth gets them 7 points if they have the majority in the location suit. And with 2 of these, that puts them in the lead. Well, we actually have 0. We could have made 1 with the Wild, but that didn't make sense to us. So with 7 points, they're now already in the lead over us. Well, they were, I guess, already because they generated the 4 points for the Madness. This is not looking good for us in this first round. Now we look at the Necronomicon, and we see they have 2 of those. So that is going to generate them 2 victory points for this Madness. And over here we have Rylith. If they had the majority in the Great Old Ones, they would get 7 points, but they don't. We have 1 and they have 0. And down here we see for each Great Old One, they get 3 points. Again, they have none of those, so neither of these cards are going to score. So when they add these all up, they ended the first round with 19 points to our 12. I think we definitely need to do some catching up. The last thing we have to do for this first round is each player is going to pick up the 5 cards that they played in that round, and they are going to select one of these cards, and they're going to put it face down until we've both chosen, and then we'll flip it face up, and that'll be a card that we have face up for the rest of the game. It'll never come back in our hands. Then we're going to pick one of the 4 remaining cards, and we're actually going to remove it from the game face up so the opponent knows what it is, and we will end up having 3 cards left over, which will be the start of our 5-card hand for the second round. When I actually analyze our options, I don't love most of them. This first one, Dreamlands, seems really good, just have a wild icon every single round, but it means for the 2 last rounds of the game, we are going to be stealing a madness from our opponent. So if we just look to the future, we have 3 right now. If we added 2 for the last 2 rounds, that brings us to 5. That means we can't take more than 3 madness for the rest of the game unless we make so much madness that we can remove one, and oh man, that puts us in a really sticky situation. I don't think we can play this card. Now when we look at the rest of them, we know that there are a couple of these manuscripts that are out there, so I think maybe what we should do is just take this one. We'll have a Great Elder God available to us all the time, and we know there are several cards that affect Great Old Ones, and also we know there are manuscripts, so we'd score 3 points if we happen to play manuscripts on the given rounds. I think that's going to be better than shooting for a majority in the Outer Gods every time, or even going for this set. So we're going to put this one face down over here. And now we get to decide which of these 4 cards gets removed from the game permanently. I think that the best one is probably gonna, oh man, I was gonna say this manuscript's down here because we don't want our opponent having the shot at getting the majority on these these Outer Gods, but this is a manuscript and we know that we kind of want these manuscripts floating around, so we're gonna keep this one around. We definitely want to keep this one around because we could easily try to make these sets again. So we're kind of left with these 2 here. This one is, this is the Wild Suit, which is a bit of a pain when our opponent has it. However, we might start to have a madness problem, and if our opponent pulls one of the madness away from us, that might actually be a good thing. So I guess we are going to be discarding Shub Niggurath. He doubles the score of the previously played card. He didn't actually do anything in this game. Poor guy, he's not actually going to ever do anything. And of course, our opponent is making the same two decisions at the same time. They've decided these are the ones they are going to be keeping and discarding, so we can go ahead and reveal these right now, and we see that they are keeping the Necronomicon. Oh man, so that means they are more incentivized to, I guess, take Madness, which is sort of good for us, but it also means they just kind of have a somewhat guaranteed victory point flow as they're playing the game. Also, it's a manuscript, and that is one less that we'll potentially be able to score as we're playing. So that's a bit of a bummer. And then these two are now revealed face up. They're out of the game. They are visible. I'm not going to leave them on the camera because we're just going to run out of space, but I'll leave them up here and I'll refer to them as needed. The biggest thing is just knowing that one of the location icons is now permanently out of the game. Each of us now has 3 cards in our hand, so we go to the deck, we deal out 2 more cards to each of us, and if you'll notice, there are only 4 cards left, so on that last round of the game, the rest of the cards will have been dealt out. It's once again time for us to simultaneously pick a card. We're going to be playing 5 cards down just like we did before, and this is just going to stay permanently up there for this round, and at the end of this round we're going to do it again and we're going to put another one right there. So let's take a look at our options. Well, we know what these first 3 are, so let's look at the new cards. Well, this is good. This is the last of the manuscript cards. We see that, oh my gosh, it's the Ausnek Prekchelichen Klutlen. That's a ridiculous word. Okay, anyway, it says, for each location, gain 3 points. All right, and the other one, oh my goodness, it's Narlathotep. It's a really big guy. He gives 13 victory points if you have a full set of all 5 of the suits, and he is an outer god. When you consider the fact that we already have a great old one in play, and we once again have 2 manuscripts in our hand because we drew a new one, I think it makes sense for us to play these deep ones as our first play again. It is going to generate us madness, which could get a little scary, but it would just guarantee that we would be able to have this full set for 6 points. I just think this is a really good idea. Now that our opponent has decided, we can flip both of these over, and they picked a new card. This one is the Great Race of Yith. We see it's going to give them madness, which makes sense. They are the Necronomicon over there. But we see that for the majority of the manuscripts, they're going to gain 7 points, and they already have a manuscript locked away that they're going to be having access to every single round, so that makes sense why they picked it, and we're a little bummed. We know that they're for sure going to be grabbing one of the manuscripts from our hand when we now transfer our hands over, and it's time to look and see what we have available. There's only one new one to us in here. It's the Mountains of Madness. It is a location, and it says, for each race, get 3 points, and we did actually play a race card for our first action. When considering what card to grab, we do now need to be careful about our madness level. We're going to be generating 1 more, which brings us to 4, and again, we're fine as long as we don't hit 9 by the end of any of the rounds to the game. And that does make this Mountains of Madness look more appealing, because it does not have any madness on it. This one right here is quite appealing as well. Rylith here says we get 7 points if we have the majority of the great older ones, and we know that there aren't any in here, so we have access to the only one in this given hand. Of course, there is the one card that would allow a transfer of madness if with the wild suit. And if we were to take that, we'd certainly lock it in. And if our opponent took it, well, I guess they could tie us up for the great old ones, and they would be taking a madness away from us. That would not actually be the worst thing in the world if that happened. However, this would also generate a madness. We'd kind of be assuming that they would be taking that one specific card. So, man, how much do we want to tiptoe over here? If we play this, we go up 2 and then maybe go down 1. Or if we play this, it's just a guaranteed 3 victory points because we already have this race card out. I think let's go with the guarantee. Let's go ahead and put this down here and not go too crazy with the madness just yet. So we now reveal our selections, and we are pretty happy to see our opponent pick the Dreamlands. That means they are going to be taking a madness back, and we didn't actually generate a madness, so this puts us in a better position. They are going to be making points for the madness every single round, so they might end up towing the line of that 9 madness a little bit more than we necessarily want to. At least they have a reason to do that, and so we now transfer over the 3 card hands. So we see what we have as an option. Now, we pretty much know we want to grab one of these manuscripts here. I guess we still would have a guarantee. If we were to take this one, for instance, we pass these to our opponent, they would give us 1 back and we'd be able to make our set, which is not the worst thing in the world, but what this guy does here Actually, now that I look at it, this guy gives 13 points if we have one of everything. We already have a great old one, we have a race, we have a location. This would give us an outer god, and oh my gosh, we would just need a manuscript. This is actually perfect. So let's just go ahead and put this down. Our opponent decides to go for this card here, so we'll flip them both over, and they have gone a little bit more mad over here. This is the majority, 7 points for the majority into locations. We now transfer over the final 2 cards, and let's see what our options are. Alright, so we could give them this, which would give them more madness, which would give them a point, but they would get even closer to potentially losing the game just because they have way too much madness. But they have put this card down, which is going to give them points if they have the majority in the locations. I guess we do already have a location over here. If we gave this to them, we would just bounce, although they might decide to make this wild 4 location and get those 7 points. The other option for us is this one right here, which would get us 3 points for each of our elder gods, our great old ones. And we have only one of them at the moment. We don't really need this outer god symbol, but I almost feel like we want to keep forcing our opponent to just eat these madness. They're going to get points from the Necronomicon, but maybe they'll just end up losing from going insane. That would be kind of fun. So let's go ahead and push that narrative. We'll throw that down here. Our opponent has picked this card here, and they're going to give this one over to us. And we can now reveal them, and we see that they really are mad. And finally, we can reveal our 5th cards down here. The first thing we look at is madness, and we only generated 1 this round, which is pretty nice, but our completely insane opponent picked 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess this last one we picked for them. They don't actually get more madness for this Necronomicon. It just kind of stays in play. So they gain 4. And at this point, they obviously have the majority. They can either get 4 points or lose a madness. It's no surprise to anybody that they are going to discard one of these madness tokens. And at this point, we can now evaluate this down here, which says they are going to take a madness from their opponent. So they are once again back at 6, and they would lose the game if they had 9 or more at the end of the 3rd and final round, which is just coming up. But let's go ahead and start scoring everything. To start, we have Haster over here, which will get us 3 points for every one of our manuscript cards. We look around, we see we have a single one of these, so that's going to get us 3 points. Next up, we have the deep ones. This is going to get us 6 points for each set of manuscripts and great old ones. We look around, we have the great old one up here and the manuscript, so we get 6 points again. Just the same, or very similar to the first round of the game anyway. Now we have the Mountains of Madness. It says for each race of the race suit, we're going to get 3 points. We have a single of those, so that's 3 more points. And now we have Naralathotep, and he is going to actually get us 13 points because we do indeed have one of each. We have manuscript, we have outer gods, we have locations, race, we have also the great old ones. That is a whopping 13 points and a really big win for us. And now we move over here. This is Azothoth. It says for each great old one we get 3 points. Well, we know we have one of those. We are getting a lot more points this round than we did that first round. And finally over here, for each location we gain 3 points, and we have 1 location. So that was a very good round. When I add all that together, that was 31 points. Before they start scoring, they decide the Dreamlands will act as a location, and now we go up to the Necronomicon. They're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points for that, so at least they are getting some bang for their crazy buck. And now the Dreamlands gets them no points. Over here, the Great Race of the Ith says if they have the majority of the manuscripts, they would get 7 points. They have 2 manuscripts, and if we look over to our section, we only have 1, so they do get those 7 points. Now we have the Panoptic manuscripts. It says if they have the majority of the outer gods, they would get 7 points. They only have 1 outer god, and we actually have 2, so they'll get nothing for this. And then over here, Yog-Sothoth is, for the majority of locations, get 7 points. Since they have a location here and they made the Dreamlands a location, that's going to be another 7 for them. And finally, we have Rylith, which says if you have a majority of the great old ones, get 7 points. Well, we know that didn't happen. They don't have any, and we have 1. So when we add all of their stuff together, they got 20 points for that round. We definitely made up for our weak round in the first section of the game, and we are overall winning as far as having the most points at this time in the game. It's now time for each of us to simultaneously pick a card to keep in front of them and a card to remove from the game permanently. Now we've decided we are going to keep Azothoth, mostly because it gets us 3 points for having a great old one, and we have 1 already. And I think what we're going to do is get rid of the Naralathotep guy. And the biggest reason for that is because Well, first of all, it doesn't have madness, and we kind of like to keep madness in the game to potentially make our opponent go insane and just have us win outright. Also, we are winning on points right now, so we don't want them to potentially have the ability to make a full set, get 13 points, and jump back in, so this is going to go away. And at the same time, our opponent decides they are going to keep this great race of Yith up here, and they are going to permanently remove this card from the game, most likely because they don't want to be forced to keep it on the last round of the game, wherein they would be forced to take a madness from us and likely lose before we even count up the points. So that ends that round. We now begin the new one. We all have 3-card hands, and we need to deal out the rest of the cards from the top of the deck. And we begin by choosing 1 card to play. First things first, let's take a look at the 2 new cards that we haven't seen yet in the game. The first is a race card. It is Elder Things, and we see it says, for each Outer God, gain 3 points. And the other one is the Miskatonic University. This is a madness-inducing spot that has no actual suit, and it says, for each majority in a suit, gain 4 victory points. So that one's particularly good late game, which is kind of where we're at. When I go through and consider my options in my hand, one really stands out, and you know what? It's crazy, but it's the deep ones. It's the one we started off with in the previous 2 rounds, and the reason for that is actually more offensive than defensive at this time. We notice up at the top, we know how this works. It says for each Great Old One and manuscript, we get 6 points. But here's the thing. Our opponent has a manuscript that's permanently up here, and we drew no Great Old Ones. We know there are 3 Great Old Ones in this entire game. We've only seen 1. That means our opponent drew both of the other 2 with these final 2 cards here. So if we were to allow them to even have that this card as an option, it would be super easy for them to place that Great Old One down and actually make this happen. We have this manuscript here. We know our opponent has a manuscript, so it's somewhat likely we'll be able to pull it off. I think it's a little silly that we're doing the same opener each time, but I think this is still definitely the right thing for us to do. We now reveal our starting selections, and we see that our opponent picked Cthulhu. We see that he says for each set of Outer Gods, locations, and races, they get 9 victory points. It is one of the Great Old Ones, to nobody's surprise. And we now go ahead and transfer our hands back over. When we look at our hand, we see that all 4 of the cards have madness on them, so we're definitely going to be taking some of those tokens. And the only card that we haven't seen yet is Dagon right here. It says, for majority in the races, gain 7 points. And we look over here, we have 1, and our opponent already has 1, so there's a bit of a tie going on right there. It's also important to note that, we're going to be giving one of these to ourselves and then to our opponent and back and forth, and it means that we're going to be getting 2 of these no matter what. So we're definitely getting 2 more madness, and our opponent is definitely getting 2 more madness. We see they are currently at 6 madness, which means that would put them at 8, which isn't quite enough for them to lose, but man, that means they are going to be getting really close. So when it comes to things that we could do that help us out, well, this is potential. We could try to fight for the races bonus. This one right here is a majority in locations. We don't have any locations. That one's not particularly interesting. This one says for a majority in the Outer Gods, get 7 points, and also this is a manuscript. And I think that we probably just want to do this no matter what, because we can make this combo happen once again, just like the other 2 turns of the game. And we look at our other option. It's for a majority in the Great Old Ones, get 7 points, and our opponent already played one, so we're tied. I think it's pretty obvious. We're going to want to go with these Panoptic manuscripts. Our opponent has made their selection, so we flip them both over. We see they picked the Mountains of Madness. They now have a location to their name, and this also is going to give them 3 points for every one of their race suits, which they have 1 of. So we're now going to change our hands back over, and we see our options are, we've got this one, which will get us 3 points for having, for every single one of our locations, of which we have none, so I don't think that's interesting. This one says for each majority, gain 4 points. Now, right now, we have 1 of each. Maybe we should not have thrown away that huge guy. That was maybe not the best idea in the world. And it means that we're not in a position to necessarily take a majority. We're tying with our opponent on the manuscripts right now. We're tying with races, we're tying with Old Gods, and we have a Outer God while they have a location. So I don't know if the Miskatonic University makes sense for us to play either. So when we look over here, we have the Elder Things. This says for each of the Outer Gods, gain 3 points. We do already have an Outer God, and this has a race, it's the race suit, which doesn't actually do anything for us, but our opponent would get 3 points if they were able to play the race suit. So let's go ahead and take this from them, put it into our area, and it looks like our opponent picked Yogg Sothoth. This is going to give them an Outer God, and it does mean that they've now actually satisfied their Cthulhu set, so they are going to get 9 points at the end of the round because they have the Outer God, a location, and a race symbol in their area, and we now both have 2 cards left in our hands. We're going to pass them to our opponents, pick one, and give one to the other. When it comes to final decisions, this one's actually pretty easy. We have Dagon here, which says for the majority in the races, we get 7 points, and we already have 2 to our opponent's 1, and we know that the Wild Suit card has been removed from the game, and the other option says for a majority in Great Old Ones, get 7 points. And if we took this, we would only have 1, our opponent has 1, and we'd be giving our opponent another one. So we'd be implicitly messing up this set. So it's obvious we should go with the Dagon. So we'll put this over here. We'll give this one over to our opponent. And the opponent picks this one, gives this over to us. We can reveal these, and we see that they took the Ausbrechen Kulten crazy thing. It says they're going to get 3 points for every one of their locations, and they have at least 1. And now we can reveal our final spots right down here, and it looks like we actually gave them a location. So that worked out pretty well for them when it comes to this card over here. And they are going to get 7 points if they have the majority in the Great Old Ones, which they don't, and we received the Miskatonic University. So at this point, we now count up and see the madness situation. Our opponent only took 2, which means just by the tiniest margin, they are not going insane. They have exactly 8 madness over here, 9 would put them over the edge and they would immediately lose, but that doesn't happen. And over here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, so we add 4 to the 3 we already had, and we were getting pretty crazy ourselves. This does mean that we were able to get the majority of madness in this round, so we can choose to either discard a madness or we could get 4 points. I think we're definitely going to take the 4 points, and now let's jump into scoring my area. So we start the round with those 4 madness points, and then Hastur over here is going to give us 3 points for every one of our manuscripts. We look around, we see we have a single manuscript, so that is 3 points right here. Now, Azathoth is going to give us 3 points for each of our Great Old Ones, and that actually worked out even better with our Dagon over here. I didn't even realize that connection. We have 2 Great Old Ones, so that is 3 times 2, or 6 more points. Now we have the Deep Ones. We have, let's see, just 1 set of the Great Old Ones and a manuscript. That's going to get us 6 points. And now the Panoptic Manuscripts says if we have a majority in the Outer Gods, we get 7 points. Now we look around and we see that we only have 1 Outer God right now, and our opponent also has 1 Outer God, which means we both tie, we don't have the majority, so we don't get these points. Down here, the Elder Things says for each of our outer Gods, we're going to get 3 victory points, and like we just said, I have 1, so that's 3 points there. Now Dagon says if we have the majority in the race suit, we get 7 points. We have 2, our opponent only has 1, so that's 7 more points for us. And lastly, we have the Miskatonic University. This is going to get us 4 points for every one of the majorities that we have. Well, we know that we have a majority in the races. We know that we don't have a majority in the Outer Gods because we already talked about that, but we do have a majority when it comes to the Great Old Ones, so that's 2 majorities, and the last one is manuscripts. We have 1 manuscript, our opponent actually has 2, so I think that just means that we have 2 majorities. I'm sorry, the manuscripts weren't the last one. There's also location, of which I have 0. So we do that twice. That's going to be 4 times 2, or 8 points. And when we sum all that up, we got a humongous 37 points. I can't believe we got even more than last turn. Our opponent begins with the Great Race of Yith, which is going to give them 7 points because they have the majority when it comes to the manuscripts. Now we have the Necronomicon. We know they have 8 of these madness tokens, so that is just straight up 8 points for them. That's the most you can score without losing the game outright. Now we have the Mountains of Madness. It says for each of the race suit, they get 3 points. They have only 1 of those, so that'll be 3. Now Cthulhu, we did mention before, they do have this full set of an Outer Gods, a location, and the races, so that is 9 points, which is a pretty good amount for them. Now, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this word again. They're going to get 3 points for each of their locations. They have 2 locations, so that's 6 points, and they're getting quite a bit this round as well. Now we have Yogg Sothoth, which says if they have the majority in the locations, get 7 points. Well, they have 2, we have none, so that is 7 more points. And lastly, down here with Rylith, if they have the majority in the Great Old Ones, they get 7 points, but there they do not. We have 2, they only have 1, so they don't get that. So when we add all of these points together, they actually beat us in this round with 40 points. So now that we have scored all the rounds, the game is officially over. We now technically check to make sure nobody is completely insane and loses, but nope, we're at 7, our opponent is at 8, so we're now going to add up the scores from all 3 rounds and see who has the most. It looks like we end the game with a really nice even 80 points. And I honestly almost can't believe it. Our opponent comes in with 79 points. They are 1 point behind us. And it's worth noting that the game does not even have a tiebreaker. So if they had scored one more point to get to 80, we would both have shared the victory, but that's not what happened. We won this game by the tiniest margin humanly possible, 80 points to 79. That is one complete game of Tides of Madness. Well, I hope you enjoyed this playthrough. I certainly did. I could not have asked for a better play of this game to capture on video. It was so incredibly close. Pretty much the whole way through. It was closer than I realized. I will admit, I was a bit cocky once I got through that second round. I didn't really do the math. I thought I was much farther ahead than my opponent. I had a lot less madness than they did, and I saw they were in a lot of trouble when it came to madness for that last round. And also, I scored 11 more points than they did in the second round, kind of forgetting that they scored 7 more points than me in the first one. So our scores were much tighter than I realized, and it was very cool to see how the different players had to react to the situation, specifically with that madness. It's the main thing that is added into this game. This is a kind of a sequel to Tides of Time, which mechanically played exactly the same way, except did not have madness. So this one brings in a new currency that can be good for you. You can get quite a bit of victory points if you take the most of it, as well as if you can utilize that Necronomicon, which the opponent did to a really good extent. I mean, obviously ending the game with 8 madness while you have that card is the way to do it. You're going to squeeze the most points for that madness that you possibly can without tipping over the threshold and just flat out losing the game entirely. So it was very cool to see how tight it was all the way through. It is definitely a variation on its predecessor. It adds in new stressors. It's definitely a more stressful situation. And it's also worth noting that when you do take a bunch of madness, maybe in the early to middle parts of the game, your last round is going to be much more dictated by the madness you have necessarily versus the cards that you really want to be playing. It was really impressive, honestly, that the opponent was able to get 40 victory points out of that last round when the biggest thing they were doing was just dodging the madness cards. I think maybe that's just our fault. We were kind of doing our own thing and not realizing we were feeding the opponent really good sets of things to pull off that huge score. Maybe it was because we were a bit cocky because we thought we were doing better with the score and thought that it was likely they were just going to get pushed into madness anyway. So I think that pretty much wraps this up. I would like to thank everybody who's been supporting my channel through Patreon, including the producer level pledges. If you too would like to directly support this channel, you could do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames, and I would really appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to see more full game playthroughs like this one, as well as in-depth board game reviews and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.